You back. Now, a leading international oil company, Shell, has agreed to sell its Nigerian onshore subsidiary, Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, to Renaissance, a consortium of 5 companies based in Nigeria, and an international energy group for up to $2.4 billion US. Well, this development will bring an end to the British oil giant's core operations in Nigeria years after its formation in 1979. The Executive Director of Policy Alert, Mr. Tija Bolton Akpan, joins me from Akwa Ibom State to discuss this and understand this development better. Thank you so much. It's good to have you on the program. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tolu. Thanks for having me.
Yes, first let's start with activities of oil and gas companies in the Niger Delta region before we now move to this development by Shell. How has it been, and how well have they been able to manage the host community and all the challenges therein? I remember serving in Akwa Ibom State and see the way gas used to flare somewhere around Esreket that year. How is it now?
Well, that fire you saw then is still burning there right now. If you go to Esreket and Ipuno, you can see the fires burning from a distance. The communities have to live with that. I must say that the relationship between the IOCs over the years and the communities has been a really toxic one. We must say upfront that the oil and gas industry has yielded a whole lot of profits, both for the IOCs and the federal government over the past, call it 6-7 decades. But has that been the case for the communities, for the citizens of Nigeria? The reverse has been the case. We have seen that Nigerians have actually not derived, the optimum benefits in terms of social, economic, and even ecological reprieves, from the oil and gas exploration and extraction activities that have been happening around them. It is like it has been said, a paradox of penury amidst plenty.
Well, the PIA should address some of these challenges. We expected, because when you look at that document, it identifies and addresses most of these challenges. What's happening with the implementation of that document?
Yes, granted, the PIA came with a whole lot of innovations. It was long awaited, and it actually addressed some of the issues, for instance, issues related to investment and improvement of the fiscal terms for the investors and so on. But the PIA also comes with a flip side. For instance, while it introduces a full chapter addressing the concerns and development of the host communities, some of the elements of these provisions actually run counter to the interests and priorities of these communities. And that is why we are concerned that an issue like divestment is coming to sit on that vacuum. The PIA does not really, in terms of the law itself and the guidelines and regulations that have been released by the regulator, have not really addressed the issue of divestment squarely. Maybe tangentially, but not as squarely as it should.
Now that the big boys, the oil companies, are leaving, most of them are divesting, they are selling their investments. What do you make of this? This would also affect projections for Nigeria's oil and gas industry.
Yes, that's true. The country actually is very ambitious in terms of what it wants to achieve for the year. You've seen the projections for oil output. You've seen the projections for revenue from the sector, which is a huge departure from what was made last year. The question is going to be, how will that miracle happen just within a matter of months when the necessary systems, structures have not been put in place to enable that happening? And then when you look at, like you said, the divestment of these companies from the space, it actually tells a different story. Globally, divestment is accelerating. We have pension funds abroad, universities, royal families, shareholders, different contexts, being put under a lot of pressure to take out their investment from fossil fuel companies. So you find that what is driving divestment globally is actually the transition to cleaner energy forms. However, while that is also having some impact on the local divestment wave, there are other rationales that are actually underpinning the current wave of divestment we are experiencing in Nigeria today, which will come to as we go on.
We need to look at these issues because we know before now we see all the oil spills, cleanups, and all of that. How well are the oil companies, the IOCs, cleaning up that area? Because, of course, exploration leads to spills and all of that. How are your fishermen coping? Those that need to, move on the farms and all of that. How they have been affected and how are they coping with all of this?
Yeah, so every day we hear stories of the communities coming up against the oil companies. And one of the things we have heard, one of the narratives that have emerged from the companies divesting is that they are moving away from the troubled onshore, right? And I find this quite disturbing because it is actually throwing up a very misleading narrative about the situation on the ground. Well, it can be taken for granted that these onshore operations have been checkered and troubled, as it were. But where has the trouble been coming from? You just mentioned environmental pollution, issues like gas flares, issues like oil spills, issues like the loss of livelihoods of fisher folk, people who can no longer go to fish in certain areas of the sea because these areas have been cordoned off by oil operations, and so on. So poverty has become the middle name of these community people as a result of the operations of the oil and gas companies. And as such, when the divestment is being contemplated, it should actually have this important set of stakeholders on the table. Unfortunately, what we are having currently is that these companies are actually exiting the same way they came. They came into this country 70 to 100 years ago without consulting with the community people. The government just gave them huge acreages. At some point, Shell had the entire Nigeria as its, acreage. And, this has continued. That colonial, frame of exploitation has continued until now. And the exit is also being framed within the same premise of don't care anything about the communities, they don't matter. The entire conversation about divestment does not even bring the communities to the table, and they are the most important factor in this equation. That is the point we are making from the point of view of advocates who are right boots on the ground with these communities. We see their challenges, we feel what they feel, and we are making a point that the divestment cannot continue to ignore their livelihoods and the ecological context within which they operate. That these companies have left behind a toxic legacy, and they have to, as a necessity, clean up that legacy, clean up that toxicity before they exit. They cannot just come here, do what they want to do, make the profits. I mean, for all we care. In 2023, ExxonMobil posted $6.2 billion as its profits. And a lot of that money is actually blood money, money that is made on the blood of people who are dying on a day-to-day basis in the areas of their operations. This is unconscionable. It's something that has to be addressed. And unfortunately, the federal government is allowing itself to be, to provide the escape vehicle, more like the getaway vehicle for this criminal escape. It's a very, very terrible thing to happen.
So I'm going to ask you, what sort of regulations do you think need to be put in place to check these excesses that you've identified with regards to operations of international oil companies? Don't forget, Nigeria would need these transactions, these are the guys that have the money to invest in this infrastructure. So what do you think can be done so that it becomes more of a win-win situation for both sides?
Right. So you talked about the PIA at the outset, and the PIA actually the regulator, as a result of the PIA, has put out there some guidelines and regulations to inform how the PIA will be implemented. Our expectation and some of the advocacy we've done in the past 2 years since the PIA came on stream is for us to have clear guidelines and regulations on decommissioning. The PIA actually talks about decommissioning and abandonment, right? But it does not actually address the issue of divestment upfront. So we have a situation where some vestiges of the old law, the old act, is still being relied on. So if you go to the NUPRC website, for instance, what you find is a guideline that was last reviewed in 2021, around March of 2021, which was months before the PIA came on stream. That is the best we can find on divestment. So it would appear that the regulator relied on some discretionary, criteria to evaluate the ongoing divestment, which is not very welcome. What needs to be done is clear-cut criteria, which will actually have the communities on the table, disclosure of the terms of this divestment. So the deal, for instance, that Shell has got now with Renaissance Group, we need to see the terms of this deal. Under the PIA, there is a provision for contract transparency, where the regulator, the NNPC, which is a joint venture partner in most of these assets, and other players in this field are expected to proactively disclose the terms of the deals they enter into with each other. We are not seeing these terms come out in the public domain. Before the conversation even started, the communities should have been brought into the picture with these terms of the deal so that they can say upfront whether they even accept for you to transfer their exploitation from one master to the next, right? Because this is actually what it is. Unfortunately, we are having this transfer happening between Shell and IOC that is under a whole lot of international environmental, social, and governance obligations at that level. And it has continued to perform as badly as it has done on these dimensions, transferring its ownership to local players, domestic oil companies, who are not under the same standards of expectation internationally. So we are going to see a whole lot of decline. There was a research the other day, some years ago, by a partner organization, SDN, which said for each barrel of oil produced, the domestic oil companies are polluting a lot more than the IOCs. We saw what happened with the Santa Barbara case, right? Where ITO, between ITO and Shell, right? So we are seeing these issues play out on a daily basis, where domestic players are unable to step into the shoes left by the international oil companies. From what we have heard, the terms of the deal is saying that these inheritor companies, these successor companies, are going to be in charge of the decommissioning and abandonment liabilities that Shell is leaving behind. Do they have the capacity to handle that? These are the questions we need to be asking at this time. So I agree with you that there is a whole lot, there are whole lots of areas that have not been looked at, in terms of the current wave of divestment, which we need to actually begin to interrogate.
Well, you would also agree with me that issues around the power crisis, the legal tussles, devaluation of the Naira, forex availability, and of course, stringent policies of government has also affected some of these multinationals.
Sure, yes. I mean, the global economy is shifting, and we agree too that the domestic context is not what it used to be. We have seen in the onset of the PIA and some of the new obligations which these companies have to hold themselves to. But let's ask ourselves the question, when they bring this whole issue about the onshore being a difficult terrain because of insecurity and so on, who is responsible for this insecurity? Why are the young people being arrested, for instance? These people are demanding, over the years, they have been demanding for the same environmental, social, and governance standards that guide the operations of IOCs abroad to also be brought to play domestically. But the companies have refused up until now to do that. These issues are the roots of the restiveness that you find in oil communities. So it would be proper to say that the restiveness we find there has actually been planted by the IOCs themselves. Talk about the environmental pollution, the cleanup. What are they doing in terms of cleanup? We've seen what happened in Ogoniland. I mean, that cleanup exercise was supposed to last for 30 years, right? And this is just Ogoniland. How long is it going to take for the rest? And it was meant to be like a test case, a pilot for the composite cleanup of the entire Niger Delta. If Ogoniland is taking this much, a lot of food dragging we have seen in the past few years, how long is it going to take before the environmental audit of the entire Niger Delta is going to happen? And we're going to begin to see the resources mobilized for a comprehensive cleanup. So there is a lot more at stake here. The companies cannot just exit, pack their bags, and go in such a very cavalier fashion like they are doing right now. So the Nigerian government should not, lend its weight or its institutions and policy frameworks as the getaway vehicle for this criminal exit that we are seeing.
A lot of work needs to be done. For the entire sector, what is your outlook for the year? Let's wrap up on that note. I know there are a lot of contending issues, but what is your outlook for? I feel like at this time we're looking at transition. How ready is Nigeria for that?
Well, Nigeria has a policy framework, the PIAA, which came on stream in 2021, and since then we've been advocating for a clearer connection between the provisions of the PIA and the imperative of an energy transition, which the rest of the world is moving to. We thought we were seeing that when Nigeria launched its energy transition plan, but the connections are not clear. For instance, in the entire PIA, the issue of climate change is mentioned only once in relation to fiscal terms, right? So we do not have that, the law creating that bridge between the current era of dependence on fossil fuels and the clean energy future which Nigeria is aspiring to. So there has to be a whole lot of pondering over the energy transition plan. Nigeria says it's going to decarbonize by 2060. That's just about 36 years from now. It looks like a long time, but it's just around the corner. So what are the clear, concrete steps in terms of diversification of the economy? You look at the 2024 budget, a whole lot is still resting on the oil and gas revenues, even though non-oil sector is actually has actually been improving in the past few years. But there is still a whole lot of dependence on oil and gas, which we have seen. So can we begin to make a gradual move away from this kind of dependence, both in terms of our budgeting and in terms of actual implementation on the ground? Where is investment of government actually going to? Are we building the skills required for this clean energy future which the rest of the world is moving to? And in any case, the IOCs are divesting now to offshore. That's just one step in the entire divestment chain. At some point, there is going to be a wholesale divestment away from the oil and gas sector. When that happens, what is going to become of the Nigerian economy with its dependency on oil and gas and fossil fuels? And more importantly, the subnationals, most of those who are currently dependent on revenue flows, derivation revenues especially. You see that many of the states, oil-producing states, have a huge dependence on oil derivation for their budgeting. When this divestment completely happens, the rug would, as it were, have been pulled off from under their feet. And we're going to have a lot of subnational economies becoming very helpless. So we need to begin to think in that direction. Unfortunately, the IOCs are thinking about the future, but the Nigerian government, the Nigerian states and subnationals appear not to be doing so.
I must thank you so much, Mr. TJ Bolton Akpan. It's the first time on the show. Executive Director, Policy Alert. We'll definitely have you join us again subsequently. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, there. Well, it's time to look at